Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a kind and beautiful princess named Snow White. Her skin was as white as snow, her lips were red as a rose, and her hair was black as ebony. Everyone who saw her loved her because she was gentle, polite, and always smiling. But sadly, Snow White's mother, the queen, died when she was a baby. After some years, the king married again. The new queen was very beautiful, but her heart was full of jealousy and pride. She could not stand it when anyone looked more beautiful than her. The queen had a magic mirror. Every morning she stood before it and said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror always answered, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." This made the queen very happy. As time passed, Snow White grew older and more beautiful. She was sweet to everyone, animals, servants, and villagers. Her beauty shone from her kind heart. One morning, when the queen looked into her mirror, something changed. The mirror spoke, "You, my queen, are beautiful indeed, but Snow White is the fairest one now." The queen's smile disappeared. Her face turned cold and angry. From that moment, she hated Snow White deeply. The queen could not stop thinking about Snow White's beauty. She wanted to be the most beautiful woman in the world, no matter what she had to do. And so, the story of love, jealousy, and kindness began. Chapter 1. The Beautiful Princess and the Jealous Queen. In a grand castle surrounded by tall mountains and deep forests, Princess Snow White lived with her father, the king, and her stepmother, the new queen. The castle had shiny floors, golden mirrors, and beautiful gardens full of flowers. Every morning, birds sang sweet songs outside Snow White's window, and she loved to listen to them as she got ready for the day. Snow White was not only beautiful on the outside, but also kind and gentle on the inside. She liked helping others. She spoke softly to everyone, and she smiled even when she was tired. The people in the castle loved her. The servants said she had the warmest heart. The gardeners said the flowers looked happier when Snow White walked by. But the queen did not like hearing anyone talk about Snow White's beauty or kindness. The queen believed that no one in the world should be more beautiful than she was. Every morning she stood in front of her large magic mirror. The mirror had a golden frame, and it could talk. The queen asked in her proud voice, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" For many years, the mirror always said, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." The queen smiled proudly each time she heard that answer. She believed she was the most perfect woman in the world. But one day, everything changed. The queen asked the mirror the same question as always. This time the mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you." The queen could not believe her ears. "What did you say?" she shouted. Her face turned pale with anger. The mirror repeated the same words calmly. The queen's heart filled with jealousy. She could not stop thinking about Snow White. "How can she be more beautiful than me?" the queen whispered to herself. "I am the queen. No one should be fairer than I am." She looked at herself in the mirror again and again, but nothing made her feel better. Her beauty did not matter anymore, because someone else was fairer. From that day, the queen's love for Snow White turned into deep hatred. She started watching Snow White secretly. She saw how people smiled when Snow White passed by, how animals came close to her, and how the king looked proudly at his daughter. Each of these moments made the queen's jealousy grow stronger. The king often went on long journeys to visit other kingdoms. When he was away, Snow White stayed in the castle with the queen. The queen pretended to be kind, but her heart was full of dark thoughts. Sometimes she gave Snow White hard work to do, like cleaning the rooms or washing clothes. Snow White never complained. She did everything with a smile. "Work is not hard when you do it with love," she often said. The queen became more and more angry. She wanted to get rid of Snow White forever. One night she called a huntsman to her secret room. Her eyes were cold and cruel. "Tomorrow," she said, "you will take Snow White into the forest. You will make sure she never comes back. Do you understand?" The huntsman was shocked. "But my queen, she is so kind and innocent," he said in fear. "I do not care," shouted the queen. "Do as I say, or you will suffer." The next morning, Snow White woke up early. The queen smiled sweetly and said, "My dear, go for a walk in the forest with the huntsman. The fresh air will be good for you." Snow White felt happy. She loved nature and the animals in the forest. She had no idea of the queen's evil plan. As they walked deeper into the woods, the birds sang and the leaves danced in the wind. Snow White laughed softly, picking flowers and talking to little animals. But the huntsman walked quietly behind her, his heart heavy with sadness. He knew what he was supposed to do, but he could not harm such a kind and gentle girl. Finally, he stopped and said with tears in his eyes, "Dear princess, forgive me. The queen ordered me to take your life, but I cannot do it. Please, run away, go far into the forest, and never come back to the castle." Snow White was shocked and frightened. She thanked the huntsman for his mercy and ran into the forest as fast as she could. Her long dress brushed against the trees, and her heart beat fast. She did not know where she was going, but she knew she had to survive. Behind her, the dark forest grew deeper. Ahead of her, a new and mysterious life was waiting. Chapter 2. The magic mirror speaks the truth. Deep inside the dark forest, Snow White ran and ran. The trees looked tall and scary, and strange sounds filled the air. Birds flew above her, and little eyes glowed in the shadows. She was tired, afraid, and all alone. Her heart beat fast, and she whispered softly, "Oh, where will I go now?" The forest was wild, but not unkind. As she walked farther, small animals appeared. Rabbits, deer, and squirrels. They looked at Snow White with gentle eyes, as if they wanted to help her. Snow White smiled weakly and said, "Don't be afraid. I will not hurt you." The animals followed her, walking beside her quietly. After a long walk, Snow White saw a tiny house between the trees. Smoke rose from its chimney, and flowers grew beside the door. "Maybe someone lives here," she thought. "I hope they will help me." She knocked softly on the little wooden door. No one answered. She knocked again, but still there was silence. Carefully, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was small and very neat. There were 7 little chairs, 7 tiny cups, and 7 small plates on the table. Everything was arranged so nicely that Snow White smiled. "Oh, how sweet and tidy this place is," she said. "I will rest here for a while." She felt hungry, so she took a small piece of bread and a sip of milk from each cup. Then she felt very tired. Upstairs, she found 7 little beds. Each one had a soft blanket. She lay down on one of the beds and soon fell fast asleep. While Snow White was resting, the 7 owners of the house were working in the mountains. They were 7 dwarves who spent their days mining for gold and jewels. In the evening, they came home singing their cheerful song. But when they entered the house, they saw something strange. "Who has been sitting in my chair?" asked one. "Who has been eating from my plate?" said another. "Who has been drinking from my cup?" cried the third. They looked around carefully and found that someone had touched all their things. Then, when they went upstairs, they saw Snow White sleeping in one of the little beds. "What a beautiful girl," whispered one dwarf. "She looks kind and peaceful," said another. "Let's not wake her up," said the eldest dwarf softly. "Let her rest. We will talk to her in the morning." Meanwhile, back at the castle, the wicked queen was waiting. She stood before her magic mirror with a cruel smile. "Mirror, mirror on the wall," she said proudly, "who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror shimmered and spoke. "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White still lives and is fairer than you. Deep in the forest she stays with the 7 dwarfs, where your eyes cannot see her heart so pure." The queen's smile froze, her hands clenched in rage. "What?" she screamed. "She lives? That huntsman lied to me." Her jealousy burned hotter than ever. "So, Snow White is still alive," she said bitterly. "Then I must finish her myself." That night, she stayed in her secret room, thinking of evil plans. She opened her old magic books and mixed strange potions. The next morning, she looked at her reflection and said, "I will go to her in disguise. Snow White will never recognize me." She wore old clothes and painted her face to look like a poor old woman. Her heart was full of hatred, but her voice was sweet and soft. "Yes," she whispered to herself. "This time, she will never escape." Far away, Snow White woke up to the smiling faces of 7 little dwarfs. She was surprised at first, but then she laughed kindly. "Oh, I am sorry I entered your home," she said. "I was lost and afraid." The dwarves liked her gentle voice. The eldest said, "You may stay here if you promise to keep our home clean and cook for us. In return, we will protect you." Snow White was very happy. "Thank you," she said with joy. "I will do my best." From that day on, Snow White lived with the 7 dwarfs. She cooked, cleaned, and sang songs while they worked in the mountains. The little house was always full of laughter and warmth, but danger was not far away. Far in her dark castle, the queen's heart grew colder every minute. Her cruel plan was ready, and Snow White's peaceful days were about to face a terrible test. Chapter 3. Snow White runs into the deep forest. Snow White lived happily with the 7 dwarfs in their cozy little house deep in the forest. Each day she cooked delicious meals, cleaned the rooms, and filled the home with her gentle singing. The dwarfs adored her and called her their dear friend. Every morning, the dwarfs went to the mountains to mine for gold and jewels. Before leaving, the eldest dwarf always said, "Be careful, Snow White. The queen is very wicked. Don't open the door for anyone while we're away." Snow White nodded with a smile. "Don't worry," she said softly. "I will be careful." For a few peaceful days, everything was wonderful. The birds sang outside the window, and the sun shone warmly through the trees. Snow White felt safe and loved. But far away in her dark castle, the queen was preparing her first plan to destroy Snow White forever. She stood in front of her magic mirror once again. "Mirror, mirror on the wall," she said in her cold voice, "Who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you. She lives with the 7 dwarfs, deep in the forest, safe from your wrath." The queen screamed in anger. "That girl still lives?" Her jealousy burned brighter than fire. "I will go to her myself and make sure she never breathes again." That night, she mixed a potion in her secret room. Strange smoke rose from a black pot, and the air smelled of danger. "This will make me look like a poor old woman," she whispered. "No one will recognize me, not even Snow White." The next morning, the queen put on old gray clothes, a dark cloak, and carried a basket of shiny red apples. One of the apples was poisoned, and just one bite would bring a deep, endless sleep. She walked through the forest, her heart full of wicked joy. The birds stopped singing as she passed. Even the trees seemed afraid of her. Meanwhile, Snow White was sweeping the floor and humming softly when she heard a knock at the door. "Knock! Knock!" "Who is it?" Snow White asked kindly. "Just an old woman selling apples, my dear," said the queen, her voice trembling like a weak old lady. "Won't you open the door? I have such beautiful red apples." Snow White remembered what the dwarfs had told her. "I'm sorry," she said politely, "but I cannot open the door. The dwarfs told me never to let anyone in." The queen pretended to sigh sadly. "Oh, poor me," she said, pretending to be weak. "I have walked so far, and no one will buy my apples. Look, my dear, I'll give you one for free." She lifted one apple high so Snow White could see it through the small window. It looked bright, fresh, and delicious. Snow White's eyes widened. "Oh, what a beautiful apple," she said. The queen smiled secretly. "Yes, my dear, take just one bite, and your lips will be as red as roses." Snow White hesitated for a moment. The old woman seemed kind and harmless. Finally, she opened the window just enough to take the apple. "Thank you, kind lady," she said. Snow White took a small bite. The moment she did, she dropped the apple and fell to the floor. Her face became pale, her eyes closed, and she stopped moving. The queen laughed wickedly. "Now who is the fairest of them all?" she said, throwing back her hood. Then she hurried back through the forest, feeling proud and sure that Snow White was gone forever. When evening came, the 7 dwarfs returned home. They found the door open and the room silent. Snow White was lying on the floor, cold and still. The dwarfs cried loudly, "Snow White, wake up! Please wake up!" But she did not move. They tried everything, but nothing worked. Her skin was white as snow, and her lips were red as a rose, but her heart no longer beat. The dwarfs built a beautiful glass coffin for her and placed it on a hill where the sunlight could shine on her face. They could not bury her, for she looked as if she were only sleeping. Every day, the dwarfs came to watch over her and wept softly. Far away in her castle, the queen stood proudly before her mirror again. "Mirror, mirror on the wall," she said, smiling, "who is the fairest of them all?" This time the mirror replied, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." At last the queen was satisfied. She smiled coldly, never knowing that true beauty lives not in the face, but in the heart. Chapter 4. A Cozy Cottage in the Woods. Deep in the peaceful forest, the 7 dwarfs lived in a small, cozy cottage. It was a lovely home made of wood and stone, with flowers growing outside the windows and a little chimney that puffed white smoke into the sky. Inside, everything was neat and tidy. There were 7 tiny chairs, 7 small plates, and 7 little beds. The dwarfs worked every day in the nearby mountains, mining for gold and jewels. They were hardworking, cheerful, and full of love for one another. Their names were Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. Each one was different, but they all had kind hearts. When Snow White came into their lives, everything changed. Their small house, which was once quiet and simple, became bright and full of laughter. Snow White cooked warm food for them, cleaned their rooms, and sang beautiful songs while she worked. In the mornings, when the dwarfs went to work, Snow White waved to them from the door and said, "Have a good day, my dear friends." "Goodbye, Snow White. Be careful, and don't open the door to strangers," they always answered. After they left, Snow White spent her time taking care of the little cottage. She washed the dishes, swept the floor, and fed the animals outside. Birds, rabbits, and deer often came to visit her. They loved listening to her soft voice as she sang. Sometimes she sat near the window with her sewing. Sunshine filled the room, and everything felt peaceful. Snow White felt safe and happy for the first time in a long while. Every evening, when the dwarfs came back home from the mountains, they were tired but cheerful. They washed their hands, sat around the table, and Snow White served them a delicious meal. "This soup is wonderful," said Happy. "And the pie smells amazing," added Bashful. After dinner, they often sang songs and told stories by the fire. Snow White laughed happily as she listened to their funny jokes. For the dwarfs, Snow White was like a daughter. For Snow White, the dwarfs were her new family. But one evening, while they were sitting together, Doc looked at Snow White with a serious face. "You must remember, my dear," he said, "never open the door to anyone while we are away. The queen is still dangerous. She will try to find you again." Snow White nodded gently. "I promise," she said. "I will be careful." The next morning, the dwarves went off to work as usual. Snow White cleaned the house and fed the birds. Everything seemed normal, but far away. In the dark castle, the queen stood before her mirror once again. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied in its deep, calm voice, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you. Deep in the forest, she lives with the 7 dwarfs." The queen's face turned red with anger. "What?" she screamed. "That girl still lives? I will not rest until she is gone forever." Her heart filled with hate. She went to her secret room and began to mix another potion. "This time," she whispered, "I will disguise myself as a kind old woman. She will never know who I am." She mixed strange herbs and powders into a pot, and smoke filled the room. When the spell was finished, she looked at her reflection. Her skin looked wrinkled, her hair was gray, and her voice was soft and shaky. She smiled evilly. "Now I look harmless. She will trust me." The next morning, Snow White was sweeping the floor when she heard a gentle knock at the door. "Good day, my dear," said a sweet old voice. "Would you like to buy a pretty red apple?" Snow White looked through the small window. She saw a friendly-looking old woman holding a basket of beautiful apples. "I'm sorry," Snow White said kindly, "but I can't open the door. The dwarves told me not to let anyone in." The old woman smiled and said, "Oh, that's very wise, my dear. But look, this apple is special. Here, take one. It's a gift." Snow White hesitated, remembering the dwarf's warning, but the apple looked so shiny and delicious. Finally, she said, "Thank you, kind lady. and reached for it. The moment Snow White bit the apple, her eyes closed, and she fell to the ground. The queen laughed wickedly. "Now you will sleep forever," she whispered before running back into the forest. Later that day, when the dwarfs came home, they found Snow White lying on the floor. "Snow White, what happened?" they cried. But she did not move. They realized the queen had found her again. The dwarfs wept and promised to protect her forever. They placed her in a glass coffin in the forest where sunlight could shine on her face. And although Snow White seemed gone, her heart still looked peaceful, as if she were only sleeping. Chapter 5. Meeting the 7 Kind Dwarfs. When Snow White first ran into the deep forest, she was tired, hungry, and afraid. The sun was setting, and the wind whispered through the trees. She walked for hours, not knowing where she was going. Then, she saw a small light shining between the trees. Curious and hopeful, Snow White followed the light until she found a tiny, beautiful cottage. The door was half open, and warm, golden light came from inside. "Oh, what a sweet little house," she whispered. "Maybe someone will help me." Snow White knocked gently, but no one answered. She stepped inside quietly. Everything inside was small but neat. 7 little chairs, 7 tiny cups, and 7 plates on the table. "How cute," Snow White smiled. "I wonder who lives here." She was so hungry that she took a small bite of bread from each plate and a sip of milk from each cup. Then she yawned. "I'll just rest for a while," she said softly. Upstairs, she found 7 tiny beds. She tried each one, but some were too short and some were too long. Finally, the 7th bed felt just right. She lay down and fell fast asleep. That same evening, the owners of the cottage were walking home from the mountains. They were the 7 dwarfs, hard-working, cheerful little men who mined gold and jewels every day. As they walked, they sang their favorite song, hi ho, it's home from work we go." When they reached their cottage, they noticed something strange. The door was open, the candles were lit, the house smelled like food. "Who has been sitting in my chair?" asked one dwarf. "Who has eaten from my plate?" said another. "Who has drunk from my cup?" cried the third. They looked around in surprise. "Someone has been here," said Doc, the eldest dwarf. They searched the room carefully, then went upstairs. There, on the 7th bed, they saw a young girl sleeping peacefully. Her hair was black as ebony, her skin white as snow, and her lips red as a rose. The dwarf stood in silence, amazed by her beauty. "What a lovely girl," whispered Bashful. "She must be an angel," said Happy. "Let's not wake her," said Doc gently. "Let her rest. We'll ask her who she is in the morning." So they quietly went to sleep. The next morning, when the sun rose, Snow White opened her eyes and saw 7 small faces looking at her kindly. She sat up quickly. "Oh," she cried, "who are you?" The eldest dwarf smiled. "We are the 7 dwarves who live here in this cottage. And who are you, dear child?" Snow White told them everything, about her cruel stepmother, the magic mirror, and how the huntsman had let her go free. She spoke softly, and tears filled her eyes. "I ran and ran until I found your home," she said. "Please, may I stay here? I will cook, clean, and keep your house in order." The dwarves looked at each other. "Of course you may stay," said Doc warmly. "You have a kind heart. We will protect you from the wicked queen." From that day, Snow White became part of their family. She cooked delicious food, baked bread, washed clothes, and kept everything clean and bright. The dwarfs loved her singing voice, which filled the little house with joy. In the evenings, when the dwarfs came home from the mountains, she welcomed them with a smile and a warm dinner. After supper, they all sat by the fire and talked happily. The dwarfs told funny stories, and Snow White laughed until her eyes sparkled. But even in that happy home, danger was still near. One evening, before going to work, Doc said seriously, "Remember, dear Snow White, never open the door to anyone. The Queen has magic and may come to find you." Snow White promised, "I will be careful, my friends." The dwarfs waved goodbye and left for the mountains, singing their cheerful song once more. Snow White watched them go, then turned back to her house. She didn't know that far away, in her dark castle, the wicked queen was already looking into her magic mirror again. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror answered, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you. Deep in the forest, she lives with the 7 dwarfs. The queen's eyes blazed with fury. "Still alive?" she shouted. "Then I will finish her myself." And with that, she began to plan her next evil trick. Snow White, unaware of the danger, sang softly as she cleaned the cottage. The sunlight danced through the window, and the little animals played around her. She didn't know that her life was about to change once again, and that the queen's dark shadow was moving closer through the forest. Chapter 6. Happy Days in the Little Cottage. The days passed peacefully in the little cottage in the forest. Snow White's life with the 7 dwarfs was full of laughter, songs, and love. Every morning, when the sun rose, she woke up early and opened the windows to let the fresh air in. Birds flew inside and sat on her hands, chirping happily. "Good morning, my little friends," she said gently. "Let's start a new day." Snow White cleaned the house, cooked breakfast, and prepared lunch for the dwarfs before they went to work. The smell of warm bread and sweet fruit filled the room. The dwarfs came downstairs, smiling. "Good morning, Snow White," they said together. "Good morning, my dear friends," Snow White replied with a bright smile. "Your breakfast is ready." After eating, the dwarfs packed their tools and put on their mining hats. Before leaving, Doc said kindly, "Remember, Snow White, don't let anyone in while we are away." "I promise," she said. "I will be careful." The dwarfs waved goodbye and went off to the mountains, singing their cheerful song. Hi ho, it's off to work we go." When they were gone, the forest became quiet again. Snow White worked happily in the house. She swept the floor, washed the clothes, and sang while she worked. Her voice was soft and sweet, and all the animals in the forest loved to listen. Rabbits, deer, and birds often gathered near the window to hear her songs. Sometimes she would go outside to pick flowers. She made beautiful garlands and placed them on the table. The cottage always looked fresh and bright. Snow White felt safe and happy. At noon, she sat by the window and ate her lunch. She often looked toward the forest path, waiting for the dwarfs to return. "I am lucky to have such kind friends," she thought. "This little house is my home now." When the sun began to set, the dwarfs came home from the mountains, tired but smiling. They washed their hands and faces, and Snow White served them dinner. The table was full of delicious food, soup, bread, and berries from the forest. "This soup is the best," said Happy. "You cook better than anyone in the world," said Bashful, blushing. Even Grumpy, who rarely smiled, said softly, "It's not bad." Snow White laughed kindly. "Thank you, my friends," she said. "I'm glad you like it." After dinner, they all sat by the fire. Snow White sang songs while the dwarfs played their instruments. The little house glowed warmly, and everyone felt peaceful. At bedtime, the dwarfs said good night and went upstairs to sleep. Snow White looked around the quiet cottage and whispered, "I wish every day could be like this." Then she knelt by her bed and prayed softly, "Please keep my friends safe." But far away in the dark castle, the wicked queen could not rest. Every morning, she looked into her magic mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror always replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White is fairer than you. She lives in the forest with the 7 dwarfs, loved by all who meet her heart so pure." The queen's face turned red with anger. "She still lives?" she shouted. "I will not stop until she is gone forever." That night, she returned to her secret room. The huntsman failed. The apple failed. Now I will use my magic once again. She opened an old spell book and mixed strange powders and potions. Smoke filled the room as she laughed wickedly. "This time," she said, "I will disguise myself as a poor old woman selling ribbons. Snow White will never know it's me, and when she tries my ribbon, it will squeeze her breath away." The next morning, Snow White was hanging clothes outside when she heard a voice calling, "Pretty ribbons for sale. Beautiful ribbons for young girls." She looked up and saw an old woman walking toward the house. Snow White smiled politely, but stayed behind the door. "Good morning, dear lady. What lovely ribbons you have." "Would you like to try one, my dear?" said the old woman kindly. "It will look so pretty around your waist." Snow White hesitated. The woman's voice was gentle and the ribbons looked beautiful. Finally, she opened the door and said, "All right, I'll try one." The old woman quickly tied the ribbon tightly around Snow White's waist. "There, don't you look lovely?" she said with a wicked smile. But the ribbon was too tight. Snow White gasped for breath and fell to the floor. The queen laughed softly. "Now you will never wake again," she whispered, leaving quickly through the forest. That evening, the dwarfs came home and found Snow White lying on the floor once more. They were shocked and heartbroken. "Snow White, what happened?" cried Doc. They carefully untied the ribbon, and slowly Snow White began to breathe again. Her eyes fluttered open, and she whispered weakly, "Oh, my dear friends, I should have listened to you." The dwarfs hugged her and said, "Please, never open the door to anyone again. The queen will not stop until she destroys you." Snow White nodded, tears in her eyes. "I promise," she said softly. And as the firelight warmed the little cottage, the dwarfs stood close to her, protecting her with all their hearts. But the queen was not finished yet. Her jealousy burned stronger than ever. She was already planning her next evil trick. Chapter 7. The Queen's Wicked Plan. The wicked queen was angry. Her reflection in the mirror told her that Snow White was still the fairest in the land. Every day her jealousy grew hotter and hotter. "That girl must die," she whispered, "or I will never be happy." The queen spent hours in her secret room, mixing potions and reading her dark magic books. Smoke filled the room, and the smell of strange herbs made the air thick. Finally, she had a plan. "This time," she said, "I will not fail. I will go to her myself. She will never see it coming. She mixed a powerful potion that would make her look like a poor old woman. Her skin became wrinkled, her hair gray, and her voice soft and weak. She wore ragged clothes and carried a small basket filled with shiny red apples. One of the apples was poisoned with a sleeping spell so strong that even the dwarves could not save Snow White if she ate it. Early the next morning, she left the castle and walked through the forest. The birds flew away as she passed. The wind seemed to whisper warnings, but the queen did not listen. Her heart was full of hate and envy. Meanwhile, in the cozy cottage, Snow White was singing while she swept the floor. The dwarves had gone to work in the mountains, leaving the house quiet and peaceful. Snow White enjoyed the sunlight and the little animals that often visited her. Suddenly she heard a soft voice outside the door. "Pretty ribbons for sale. Beautiful apples for a kind young lady." Snow White turned and saw a small old woman standing at the gate. She was hunched and smiled gently, holding a basket of shiny red apples. Her voice was sweet, and her eyes seemed kind. Snow White remembered what the dwarfs had told her. "Do not open the door to strangers," she whispered to herself. But the old woman spoke kindly. "Dear child, look at my apples. They are the sweetest you have ever seen. Take one. It is a gift for you." Snow White's mouth watered. The apples looked shiny, bright, and delicious. She looked at the door and then at the old woman. "Maybe just one bite," she thought. The queen smiled secretly. "Yes, my dear. Just one bite, and your lips will be as red as a rose," she whispered in her heart. Snow White stepped outside carefully and picked an apple from the basket. "Thank you," she said politely. The moment she bit into the apple, she fell to the ground. Her face became pale, her eyes closed, and she stopped moving. The queen laughed softly. "Now you will never wake again," she whispered, before disappearing into the forest. When the dwarfs returned home that evening, they were surprised to find the door open. They rushed inside and saw Snow White lying on the floor. "Snow White!" they cried, panic in their voices. "Wake up! Please, wake up!" They tried to help her, but nothing worked. She did not move. Her skin was white as snow, and her lips were red as a rose, but she seemed frozen in a deep sleep. The dwarfs were heartbroken. "How can we protect her?" asked Doc, his voice trembling. "We have done all we could." They carried Snow White carefully and placed her in a glass coffin on a hill near the forest, where the sunlight could shine on her face. Every day, they sat beside her, crying softly and keeping watch. Despite her sleep, Snow White's gentle smile remained on her lips. It was as if she knew the dwarfs loved her and that they were watching over her. Far away, the queen returned to her castle. She looked into her magic mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White's heart is pure, and one day her kindness will shine above all." The queen's face turned red with anger. She could not bear it. But she did not know that true love and kindness were stronger than any magic. And so, while the queen's wicked plans seemed successful, the story of Snow White was far from over. Her friends, the Seven Dwarfs, kept hope alive, and a new chapter of her adventure was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Poisoned Apple, a Deadly Trick. The forest was quiet, the little cottage was empty, and the birds had stopped singing. Snow White had been asleep since the queen's wicked trick. The 7 dwarfs could not believe their eyes when they saw her lying on the floor after biting the poisoned apple. Her skin was as white as snow, her lips were as red as roses, and her hair fell softly around her face. She looked peaceful, but she did not wake. The dwarfs tried everything they could think of, shaking her gently, calling her name, and even fanning her with leaves. Nothing worked. Doc, the eldest dwarf, looked very worried. "This is no ordinary sleep," he said softly. "The queen has used her dark magic. Only true love or a powerful spell can save her." The other dwarfs felt sad and scared. "What will happen to her?" asked Bashful, his voice trembling. "Don't worry," said Happy, trying to smile. "We will protect her, no matter what." The dwarfs carefully carried Snow White outside. They placed her in a beautiful glass coffin on a hill where the sunlight could shine on her face. The flowers around the coffin looked brighter, as if they wanted to help her. Birds and little animals came and stayed close to her. The forest seemed to honor her gentle spirit. Every day the dwarves visited her. They cleaned the glass, placed fresh flowers around her, and whispered softly to her, hoping she could hear them. "Please wake up, Snow White," they said together. "We love you, and we will never leave you alone." Meanwhile, far away, the queen returned to her dark castle. She looked into her magic mirror and smiled cruelly. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror answered, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, but Snow White still lives, and her kindness will shine one day." The queen's face turned red with anger. "She still lives?" she shouted. "I will not rest until she is gone forever." Back at the forest, life for the dwarfs was quiet, but full of hope. Even though Snow White could not speak or move, they did not lose courage. Each dwarf took turns sitting by her coffin, keeping her company and singing soft songs. "Do you think she can hear us?" asked Sneezy, sneezing nervously. "Of course she can," said Doc kindly. "Her heart is pure. She knows we love her, even in her sleep." Days passed, and one morning, a prince arrived in the forest. He had heard stories about Snow White's beauty and kindness from villagers far away. He wanted to see her with his own eyes. When he reached the hill, he saw the 7 dwarfs standing around the glass coffin. "Who is this girl?" asked the prince. "She is Snow White," said Doc. "She has been poisoned by the wicked queen. She lies in this coffin, but her heart is pure and kind." The prince looked at her face. He saw her gentle smile and the peacefulness around her. "I have heard tales of her courage and goodness," he said softly. "I will help her." He knelt by her coffin and whispered, "Dear Snow White, you are the kindest and bravest of all. My heart is full of hope for you. Please wake and live again." As he spoke, a strange, gentle wind blew through the trees. The sunlight on her face grew brighter, almost like it was carrying hope and magic. The dwarves watched in amazement. The poisoned apple had stopped her from waking, but Snow White's story was not over. True kindness, love, and hope had begun to work their magic, even against the queen's dark spell. The queen, far away in her castle, did not know that her evil plan had not completely succeeded. Snow White's friends and the prince were already preparing to change her fate forever. The forest was quiet, but it felt alive with hope. The animals, the dwarfs, and even the trees seemed to wait for the moment when Snow White would open her eyes again. And so, the poisoned apple's deadly trick had only delayed the magic of love and friendship. Snow White's story was about to take a new turn, one that would surprise the wicked queen and bring happiness back to the forest. Chapter 9. The Deep Sleep of Snow White. Snow White lay in the glass coffin, deep in the forest. The sunlight shone gently on her face, making her look like she was only resting, even though she had been under the queen's poisoned spell for many days. The flowers around her were bright, and the birds often perched nearby, singing soft songs. It seemed as if the forest itself wanted her to wake. The 7 dwarfs stood around the coffin, their faces sad and worried. Each one took turns keeping watch. They brought fresh flowers, swept the area, and sang quietly to her. Doc, the eldest dwarf, sighed deeply. "She has been asleep for so long," he said. "I fear the queen's magic is very strong, but we must never give up hope. Snow White is pure and kind, her heart is strong, and love will find her." The other dwarfs nodded. "We will not leave her, Doc," said Happy. "We will stay here until she opens her eyes again." Even though Snow White could not move or speak, the dwarfs felt that she could sense their love and care. She looked peaceful, with a gentle smile on her lips. It was as if she knew they were beside her, protecting her from all harm. One day, a young prince came to the forest. He had heard stories from villagers about a beautiful girl who had been cursed by a wicked queen. He wanted to see her with his own eyes and help her. When he reached the glass coffin, he saw the 7 dwarfs standing around it, looking sad but hopeful. "Who is this young lady?" asked the prince. "She is Snow White," said Doc softly. "She has been poisoned by the queen. She cannot wake, but she is kind and brave, and we watch over her every day." The prince looked at Snow White's face. Her skin was as white as snow, her lips as red as roses, and her hair black as ebony. She looked like a sleeping angel. "She is beautiful," he whispered, "and her heart is pure. I will help her." He knelt beside the coffin and spoke to her gently. "Dear Snow White, your kindness and courage are known to all. The world is waiting for your smile. Please wake, for love and friendship are here for you." As he spoke, a gentle breeze moved through the trees. The sunlight grew brighter, touching her face like a warm, loving hand. The animals in the forest, birds, rabbits, and deer came closer and watched silently. The dwarfs looked at the prince in surprise. Could it be that his words carried magic? Could love truly break the queen's spell? Slowly, Snow White's fingers twitched, her eyes fluttered open, and she took a deep, soft breath. She looked around and saw the 7 dwarfs, smiling and crying with joy. "Oh," she whispered, You kept me safe?" "Yes, Snow White," said Doc, tears in his eyes. "We never left you, and now you are awake." The prince smiled gently. "Your heart is pure, Snow White," he said. "True love and kindness can never be stopped, not even by evil magic." Snow White looked at him and smiled softly. "Thank you," she said. "I feel safe, and I feel happy." The dwarfs laughed and danced around the coffin. Happiness filled the forest. Birds sang louder than ever, flowers seemed to bloom brighter, and the sunlight shone warmly on everyone. Far away, in her dark castle, the queen looked into her magic mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" she asked proudly. The mirror answered, "You, my queen, are fair, it's true, But Snow White lives and shines brighter than you. Her kindness and courage have awakened her heart, and love has saved her from your wicked spell." The queen's face turned red with anger and fear. She realized that no evil plan could destroy true kindness and love, and so Snow White's deep sleep ended. Her friends, the 7 dwarfs and the prince, had saved her. The forest was filled with joy and hope, and Snow White's story of courage, kindness, and love continued. Chapter 10. The Prince's Kiss of True Love. The forest was filled with light and happiness. Snow White had woken from her deep sleep, and the 7 dwarfs danced and laughed around her. Birds chirped joyfully, and flowers seemed to bloom brighter than ever. But there was one final moment that would complete the magic of her awakening. The young prince knelt beside Snow White's glass coffin. He looked into her gentle eyes and spoke softly. "Dear Snow White, your heart is pure, your courage is great, and your kindness has touched everyone. You deserve happiness." Snow White smiled weakly but brightly. "Thank you, kind prince," she said. "Your words brought hope to me when all seemed lost." The prince held her hand gently. "Snow White," he said, "true love can break even the strongest magic. I will give you my promise and my heart. With this kiss, you will be free from the queen's evil spell forever." Snow White's eyes widened. She had heard tales of magical kisses, but she never imagined that love could truly be so powerful. Her heart beat faster as the prince leaned closer. The 7 dwarfs watched in silence. Doc whispered, "This is it, the magic of love." The others nodded, holding hands and waiting to see the miracle happen. The prince pressed his lips softly against Snow White's forehead. A warm light surrounded them, brighter than the sun. The poison of the apple faded, the darkness disappeared, and Snow White felt her strength return. She breathed deeply, smiled fully, and looked at the prince with joy. "I feel alive again," she said happily. "Thank you, my prince, and thank you, my dear friends." The dwarves cheered loudly. Happy jumped up and down. Bashful wiped tears from his eyes. Grumpy even smiled, though he tried to hide it. Sleepy yawned happily, and Dopey clapped his hands. Sneezy sneezed with joy, filling the air with laughter. The prince stood and smiled. "Snow White, you are safe now. The queen's magic cannot harm you any more. Your heart and goodness are stronger than any evil." Snow White looked at him and nodded. "Yes, I feel safe and I feel happy. I will never forget your kindness and the love that saved me." The dwarfs guided Snow White and the prince outside. The forest was alive with color. Birds sang, flowers bloomed, and the wind whispered softly through the trees. Even the sun seemed to shine brighter than before. Snow White turned to the dwarfs. "My friends, you kept me safe. You never left me alone. I will always be grateful to you." Doc smiled warmly. "We only did what was right, Snow White. Your happiness is our joy." The prince took Snow White's hand gently. "Snow White, will you come with me to my kingdom? There, we will live happily and safely, far from the queen's wickedness." Snow White looked at the dwarfs. "I will go," she said, "but I will always visit you. You are my family, and I love you all." The 7 dwarfs hugged her tightly. "We love you too, Snow White," said Doc. "Go and be happy with your prince." Snow White and the prince rode together through the forest. The animals followed them a little way, and the dwarfs waved from the hill. The trees swayed gently as if saying goodbye and good luck. Far away in her dark castle, the queen looked into her magic mirror one last time. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" she asked, hoping to hear her name. The mirror replied, "Snow White, who lives and loves, is the fairest of them all. Her heart is pure, her courage strong, and true love has won the day." The queen's face turned red with anger, and she realized that no evil could ever conquer goodness and love. And so, Snow White and the prince arrived safely at his castle. The halls were filled with laughter and music. She was surrounded by love and happiness, and the 7 dwarfs visited often, bringing joy and stories of the forest. Snow White had faced danger, fear, and evil, but her courage, kindness, and the love of her friends had saved her. And from that day forward, she lived happily ever after, knowing that true love and goodness always win in the end. Chapter 11. The Queen's Defeat. Far away in her dark castle, the wicked queen was furious. Her mirror had told her that Snow White was the fairest, and that the girl had been saved by love and kindness. "No!" she screamed. "I will not let her win." The queen began to plan one final trick. She wanted to destroy Snow White and take her beauty for herself. She mixed potions, read her magic book, and practiced spells late into the night. Her heart was full of anger, but she did not know that true goodness is stronger than magic. Meanwhile, in the castle of the prince, Snow White lived happily. She laughed, sang, and learned about the prince's kingdom. She often thought of the 7 dwarfs and the forest. She missed them and loved them dearly. "They saved my life," she said softly. "I will never forget them." The queen, however, could not rest. She disguised herself once more, this time as a dark sorceress. She planned to sneak into the prince's castle and harm Snow White. But as she flew toward the castle on her black horse, a sudden storm began. The sky turned gray, lightning flashed, and the wind grew strong. The queen's horse stumbled, and she fell into a deep river. The current was too strong, and the queen's magic could not save her. She screamed, "No, this cannot happen!" But the river carried her away, and she was gone forever. The wicked queen had been defeated, not by sword or battle, but by the strength of Snow White's heart and the power of goodness. Back in the castle, Snow White and the prince were unaware of the queen's final defeat. They were enjoying a quiet morning together. Snow White looked out the window and smiled at the sunrise. "The forest is so beautiful," she said, "and I am so lucky to have love and friends who care for me." The prince nodded. "Snow White, you have shown that kindness and courage can overcome any danger. You are the bravest and most beautiful person I have ever met." The 7 dwarfs soon arrived at the castle. They brought gifts of flowers, gold, and jewels. They were happy to see Snow White alive and safe. "We missed you," said Doc. "And we are proud of you," said Happy. "Your courage has inspired us all." Snow White hugged each of them tightly. "You are my family," she said. "You saved my life, and I will always love you." The castle was filled with laughter, music, and joy. Snow White, the prince, and the 7 dwarves celebrated together. The people of the kingdom were amazed at Snow White's bravery and kindness. Everyone agreed that true goodness and love had triumphed over evil. The news of the queen's defeat spread through the land. Villagers cheered, and the kingdom rejoiced. They knew that Snow White and the prince would rule with kindness, justice, and courage. Snow White often remembered the forest, the little cottage, and the animals who had stayed by her side. She promised to visit the Seven Dwarfs and bring joy to them, as they had brought joy to her. The prince held her hand gently. "Snow White, you have faced great danger and evil, but your heart has remained pure. Now we can live happily together and bring happiness to others." Snow White smiled. "Yes, my prince, and I will never forget the lessons I learned. Kindness, courage, and love are stronger than any evil magic." The dwarfs clapped their hands and danced around. Even Grumpy smiled, and Dopey laughed loudly. Sneezy sneezed happily, and Bashful blushed with joy. The castle was full of love, laughter, and celebration. And so, the wicked queen was gone forever. Her evil plans had failed, and Snow White's goodness had won. Peace returned to the kingdom, and the forest, the dwarfs, and all of Snow White's friends celebrated her victory in their hearts. The story of Snow White showed that no matter how strong evil may seem, kindness, courage, and love are always stronger. Chapter 12. Snow White's Happy Ending, Ever After. The kingdom was alive with joy. The wicked queen was gone forever, and Snow White's courage, kindness, and pure heart had brought peace to the land. The prince held her hand, and the seven dwarfs stood nearby, smiling and proud. Flowers bloomed everywhere, birds sang loudly, and the sunlight seemed warmer than ever. Snow White looked around the castle and thought of her journey. She remembered the dark forest, the little cottage, and the seven dwarfs who had taken her in and cared for her. "I am so lucky," she whispered. "I have love, friendship, and courage on my side." The prince smiled. "Snow White, your heart has saved you, and now together we can bring happiness to everyone in the kingdom." The people of the kingdom gathered to celebrate. They cheered for Snow White and the prince. Children waved flowers and elders smiled warmly. The story of Snow White had inspired everyone. They knew that kindness and courage were more powerful than any evil. Snow White and the prince often visited the forest and the little cottage where the seven dwarfs lived. She hugged each of them tightly. "You are my family," she said. "You protected me, and I will never forget you." Doc smiled. "We are proud of you, Snow White. You were brave and kind, and you have taught us the true meaning of love." Happy clapped his hands. "Now we can all celebrate together." Bashful blushed. Sleepy yawned happily. Sneezy sneezed in joy, and Dopey laughed and danced around. Even Grumpy smiled, though he pretended to be serious. The prince and Snow White also helped the villagers in the kingdom. They built schools, planted gardens, and shared food with those in need. Snow White's kindness touched everyone, and the people loved her. They often said, "Snow White is not only beautiful, but she is also the kindest and bravest of all." One morning, Snow White and the prince walked through the castle gardens. She saw the sunlight on the flowers and smiled. "Everything is so beautiful," she said, "and it reminds me of the forest, the little cottage, and the friends who saved me." The prince took her hand gently. "Snow White, you have made the kingdom brighter with your heart, and together we will keep it safe, happy, and full of love." Snow White nodded. "Yes, my prince, and I will always remember that true happiness comes from kindness, courage, and friendship." The seven dwarfs visited often, bringing laughter and joy. They told stories of the forest, shared gifts, and celebrated every small moment with Snow White. She taught them songs from the castle, and they laughed together, just like old friends. The kingdom continued to flourish. People learned from Snow White's example to be brave in the face of danger, to help others, and to never lose hope. Snow White's story became a legend, shared from one generation to the next. Years passed, but Snow White never forgot the lessons she had learned. She remained kind, courageous, and loving. The prince stayed by her side, and together they ruled the kingdom with fairness and wisdom. The forest was peaceful, the cottage still stood, and the 7 dwarfs were always part of Snow White's life. Every spring, the flowers bloomed brighter, the birds sang sweeter, and the wind whispered gently through the trees, reminding everyone of Snow White's journey and the power of love. And so, Snow White and the prince lived happily ever after. The kingdom was full of laughter, kindness, and hope. Snow White's story proved that no evil could defeat a heart full of courage, love, and goodness. The forest, the cottage, the dwarves, and the kingdom all shared one truth: true love and kindness always win in the end.